Hello everybody, my name is Bocksch. Of course, I want to thank everybody for being here as well, especially since many of you have come from all over Europe and the world. It really is a pleasure having you all here. What makes me relate to everything we are talking about here very strongly is the true humane and empathetic approach and the systemic approach of not just simply blaming people for their flaws, but to understand where the origins of behavior lies, by looking at the environment as a whole and our connection to it. Today I want to give a perspective of how the world, or better said, the economic structure we live in, holds us back from becoming the best we can be, individually but also collectively, and how the outdated and destructive patterns of the system create an environment of suffering. As you can see, the title of my talk is Faces of Structural Violence. I realized I would have to be very general and undetailed due to the vast amounts of examples that exist. So if some of my points seem simplified or overgeneralized, I still hope the overall message comes through. I'm using some pictures to underline what I'm saying. It's more of a telling a story and asking some questions than a scientific talk, to which hopefully many can relate in one or another way. And also, although I will mention a couple of numbers, I would recommend, of course, everybody to research this for yourself. And by the way, I didn't use the most horrific images I could find on the internet. I will try to give a positive outlook towards the end. First, let's define the term structural violence. Well, it's pretty straightforward. The term structural violence is defined by any form of preventable deprivation and suffering, and therefore violence towards humans and animals, which is structurally induced, directly or indirectly, by any given system. In this case, we are talking about the so-called free market system, the competitive, profit-oriented, scarcity-based market structure under which we all live today. I'm inviting you to a quick journey throughout the landscape of some of the examples of structural violence. First, let's look at war, a rather obvious example of violence in the system, where many people see no other way as to fight for their freedom or safety. So around 174,000 so-called civilians have been killed in the recent wars of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, alone in the year of 2014. With the US having spent approximately $4 trillion as of 2011. So wars and weapons are a serious business. So I simply want to ask a question. Is it a surprise that people being left with nothing, or are consumed by fear and anger, are more likely to cling to radical religious and political views and actions? I'm quoting Dr. Gerald Hüther, a German neurobiologist. Confronted with fear, uncertainty, and existential stress, the human brain is only left with three options: either fight or flight. If these options are taken away, unconscious, paralyzing numbness. So could we ease or prevent those situations right now, instead of using those trillions of dollars for war, actually helping people and providing people with what they need? Creating a strategic access abundance to necessary resources with the help of technical means. So would this change anything? So why are we not? Only a lack of will? Or just politics? Or an inherent system failure which underlies everything? So what we see today and what comes with war and economical and climate crisis is people fighting for survival, losing their homes and livelihood, being forced into trying to migrate into other areas and countries. So currently there are about 51.2 million people looking for refuge worldwide. Is this preventable suffering? Is this preventable violence, which we could change with a different approach? We surely have all the resources and technological means. And like money, country borders are only a man-made illusion. Moving to the next example. So what happens when prisons handle money? Or even privatized, as we can see, for example, in the United States, where roughly 1 in every 32 Americans is being held by the justice system, consuming $60.3 billion per year. So there's a lot of money being moved around. There's a lot of money to be made by someone, keeping the whole thing going. So again, what would happen if people's material and social needs would be met, instead of having them steal or feed their addiction, fighting for their own? In other words, creating a different environment for them and for all of us. Would there be less or no need for people to become criminals, so to speak? Is it violence produced by the economic structure, if the technical and social means are there, but are just not seen as affordable and therefore are not implemented? A subpoint to this topic, of course, is police brutality and government brutality in general, where really what happens is struggling people fight or are put up against other struggling people. In the system where existential worries are met with the government's demanding blind obedience, instead of, again, being able to properly provide for the people's needs. And furthermore, blaming the stressed individual for their behavior. Yeah, but then again, what do we expect in a social Darwinistic system? Now let us extend our view a little further. For example, the exploitation of indigenous people around the world. The few indigenous cultures this planet still inhabits are confronted by today's corporations and industries and their ways of conquering new lands for personal gain, only looking to get cheap materials and resources and behaving in the most unconscious and destructive ways one can imagine, without taking into consideration of how the consequences of their actions are impacting these cultures, both environmentally but also sociologically and psychologically and physically. The outcomes of these actions are massive social problems and destructive addiction and disease, with the whole culture destroyed, people being paralyzed by their pain. Again, would this be necessary with a sustainable, resource-oriented, respectful economic view, where there would not be the need to rapidly use up the resources just to feed our cyclical, wasteful consumption, which this capitalist market structure needs to keep its paradigm going? To again keep us all blindly running after the next gadget we throw away again so thoughtlessly. What about natural disaster? What's the first question being asked, primarily by governments, when something horrific and oftentimes unforeseen happens to vast numbers of people, like floods and tsunamis and hurricanes and the like? Well, the first question is, who's going to pay for it? And what the financial damage has been to the area or country. And this is ridiculous if you think about it. Isn't this preventable suffering and violence induced by the mere structure of the inefficient system itself, focused on the wrong things? Where there could be better protection and alarm systems, housing, and any other technologies helping people with those, in those areas of risk. And I'm kind of quoting Jacques Fresco here. It would be technically doable, but it's just not financially affordable. Next, looking at human and animal poisoning and death due to toxic waste and industrial pollution. Besides this being an ecological disaster, toxic waste and pollution of all sorts are one of the major causes of loss of biodiversity and of illness and death of human beings. From what we know today, environmental pollution caused by industrial powers getting rid of their industrial waste in a, for them, financially cost-efficient way is harming people on various levels. WHO reports of 2012 show that around 7 million people die every year, 1 in 8 of total global deaths, only as a result of air pollution exposure. Another example is violence and exploitation of animals. This point is also about the source of toxicity towards humans and one of the major destructive factors of ecological damage and resource waste. But also, it's a form of preventable suffering and violence towards animals, being tortured and exploited to feed our habits of daily meat consumption. Animals are being kept in concentration camp-like situations, being filled with growth hormones for a faster harvest, being pumped full of antibiotics for keeping the epidemic sickness down, to get the most out of the animal for profit. Let's move on to examples where humans suffer due to the inefficiency of the system. Labor for income, or wage slavery. At least 90% of the people living on this planet today have to work to make ends meet. Many feel that slavery is mostly a term or issue of the past, which has been overcome. But if slavery means being forced by a person, or in this case, by the economic structure itself, to do a job that makes you ill and not able to be socially active or creative, and in the end, even shortens your life expectancy. In other words, being harmed mentally and physically by your job. Can this not be defined as slavery? Well, when we could provide for a high standard of living for everybody, if we would focus on resource management and human well-being instead of money management and the focus on profit? What about production and construction accidents and any other form of job-related illness? Well, with this example, the same rules apply. If your job could be replaced by automation and technical efficiency, or could be simply gotten rid of totally, but is not, isn't every bit of harm happening to a person an outcome of, or a symptom of an inefficient and outdated system? People having to stay in wage slavery and keeping their jobs to sustain their lives. In the United States alone, 4 million workers suffer from job-related injuries or illnesses every year, plus thousands dying as a result of that. Imagine the deaths and health impacts related to outdated working practices globally. So the term modern slavery or wage slavery is not just a shocking statement, it is literal blatant reality. In fact, there are more slaves on earth than have ever been in human history. With people working in cheap conditions, also because automation is increasingly replacing human labor, but which in this system currently is not really for the benefit of the people, but mostly beneficial for the companies and their profits. And let us also keep in mind what almost every political party worldwide promotes and is valued for: creating more jobs. Does this make any sense? Of course, slavery doesn't stop at adults and gets, if that's even possible, even more perverted. As we can see in child labor, this is a symptom of the global oh-so-free market system. Yes, it's free to exploit everyone and everything at will, using the weakest among us, paying the price for our cheap and shiny products most of us consume so thoughtlessly again. An estimated number of about 270 million children work worldwide, and many of them full-time. Bringing me to the next point of physical and mental symptoms which are present in all levels of society due to income inequality and poverty. We humans are sensible and deeply social beings and are profoundly affected by our environment. And the next graph shows this quite clearly. This graph is taken from the work of British social epidemiologist Richard Wilkinson. As we can see, income inequality has a drastic effect on every social and health issue being presented. We can see that the countries where the gap between rich and poor are the highest, also most problems occur. And besides the fact that people simply don't have the money to properly care for themselves, it is a general social problem, creating stresses, where low status and felt worthlessness and shame have profound effects on the psyche of humans, confronted with the exploitive nature of the capitalist system. And as Gandhi already understood, poverty is the worst form of violence. Studies conservatively estimate the total costs associated with serious mental illness to be around $300 billion per year in the United States alone. So instead of just throwing money at everything, trying to patch up the symptoms the system produces, we should address the root cause, which is the inherent problem of existential crisis and competition in society. Could there be a way of spending this money more efficiently to make people's lives better, giving them proper care by changing their environment and getting them out of the slavery situation? For example, with a guaranteed basic income only being one of the easing factors. How can we even expect social and caring and attentive behavior if we are also preoccupied with mere survival and trying to get up the ladder of financial success? Global suicide rates have increased 60% in the past 45 years. Why? Well, might it be that it's just all too much, living in a totally inhumane socioeconomic structure, which is not supporting and reflecting our deepest human needs, like social companionship, caring for each other, trust and safety, and having existential stress reduced in life? This again could be very different if we did what we can do to achieve human sustainability, and not just what is financially affordable. But then again, the system isn't set up to provide for people or support their health and well-being. It exploits the weaknesses caused by the system itself. Of course, the more people are sick and addicted, the better for the market and the companies to make fast profit. So is it really in the interest of the free market to cure or heal? The US spends $600 billion annually to treat people with addiction, with approximately 20% of its population being addicted to alcohol and illegal and legal prescription drugs. So imagine the market for this, and imagine the numbers globally again. And just remember the advertisements trying to manipulate us to go deeper into substance dependency, playing with our fears for profit. The biopsychosocial stress in this system brings about a cycle of trying to make ends meet, being overwhelmed and stressed, and then trying to cope with it in various ways of soothing oneself, to keep on doing what needs to be done, trying to sustain the social and financial mobility, looking for anything that makes life just a little more bearable. So all of these are again symptoms of an outdated system structure, cases of structural violence. The question really is, can we understand people with addiction and all other forms of mental and physical illness in separation of their environment? The answer is no, we can't. In the words of Dr. Gabor Mate, 50% of adult Americans have chronic illness, like diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, and any form of autoimmune illness. According to a strict medical model, that's just too bad. It makes two separations. One, it separates the mind from the body, so the emotional impact on the body isn't valued. And two, it separates the individual from his environment, so they try to understand individuals separated from their actual lives, to blame it on bad luck or bad genetics. This doesn't look at the interconnectedness of everything, but it uses it as a cop-out from looking at the real root cause, which lie in our environment in total. The measure to which all people in today's environment are being held to is economic value. You're only worth what your financial worth is. People are seen as a burden or costly to society as long as they don't generate financial wealth. And this, as we saw, produces extensive health problems on all levels. Up to this point, the big industries are continuing to make unprecedented loads of money. And I really want to add here that currently there are fierce debates about how people questioning any of the products and statements coming out of the established medical institutions and pharmaceutical industries are against science in general. How can this be? We know that governments and medical institutions are inseparably intertwined with the industries. And lobbying work, fraud, and manipulation is being done to a great extent. We know that almost nothing is exempt from the inherent corruption and inefficiency the market produces. When it comes to other products, for example, planned obsolescence in technical devices. Not to mention that the healthcare industry in general is a major branch of today's economy. So couple that with the profit motive, what do we expect? So is there money to be made from healthy people who don't need most of those products? And I'm not saying that most scientists and doctors out there are not well-intentioned. I'm saying that the fundament of the system and every market action is operating on the same premise of scarcity and profit and self-interest. So the way things work today, can we really have an efficient human healthcare system which benefits the people? The same goes for the food industry. What we have are food industries operating on the same premise, only functioning to make people buy more products, using all sorts of cheap and untested chemicals and tricks. So if people don't have the money to buy oftentimes more expensive, better quality products, or get sick because of the profit-oriented practices, which in general have no real interest in, or simply can't know, how their products affect human beings in the long term. Isn't this a form of structural violence? And will we see these problems and behaviors in a system not being fueled by the profit interest? So what about the rich? Despite all their financial wealth and perceived freedom and status, are they not influenced by the social and health and ecological ramifications the system produces? Well, to most extents, of course. In German, we have a saying, do not pee in the same stream you have to drink from. Of course, we're all connected and everything is. And even the rich are not able to separate themselves from the environmental influences. Of course, they as well have and will be suffering the consequences of ecological destruction and unsustainable human problems. They as well are facing psychological problems due to the lack of trust and safety. And they have to realize that there's no escape, even though many of them think they will, by just not looking at the problem, or even better, by leaving Earth entirely. You can be the most egotistical person, or the most altruistic one. Since we are all connected, living on this planet for now, self-interest has to become social interest, or we all will suffer the consequences. So what can we all do right now to support a more sustainable behavior and a more efficient economic system? Well, again, a lot. In fact, the possibilities are exponentially growing as we speak. Here are only a few of them, which might not be the ultimate solution, but it's all a process. So we could support positive solution-oriented people and organizations. We can try not to look away when confronted with suffering. We can support open source technologies and projects which help transition into a more cooperative system. We can start sharing whatever we can with others. There are already organizations exist which are building networks for sharing food and other resources, also minimizing the waste and slavery the system produces. We can support an unconditional basic income, which frees ourselves just a little more, from the paralyzing life of labor. We can support local organic and vertical farming, hydroponic and aquaponic projects, and at the same time boycott the big food corporations. We can try to reduce waste and pollution by recycling and upcycling, and stop supporting the big companies and their poisonous products. We can use more sustainable sustainable energy sources like wind and solar and water and geothermal and many others. On a personal level, we can, again, start eating more healthy and plant-based and nourishing foods, trying to move our bodies a little more, to take back responsibility for our health. We can start to find ways of helping each other to relax more. There are so many ways like meditation and music and human contact in general, and so much more. So we can reach out to one another in empathy and practice nonviolent communication. Of course, there are many other valid examples to help to transition into the world we would like to see, which I haven't mentioned. But everybody can use their knowledge and expertise to add to this list. I'm quoting Buckminster Fuller here. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So while trying to live the previous examples, we need to speak out. We need to help to spread the word without opposing. And we need to overcome our fears. By talking about the problems and multiple solutions, we are creating a different consciousness in the world. We are putting out memes, information which can potentially help people to find their own way out of the struggle. You never know what kind of positive action one hint in the right direction can inspire another person. Another world is possible if we choose to stand up and demand a better life. So let's tell a new story. Thank you very much.